Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We are going to start a new theme this week, that being a dive through sludge metal. This is still a genre that I'm not entirely keen of what it is. I have an idea, but every time I think of sludge metal, I actually think of doom metal. Sludge metal is more of a texture than a speed, but sludge makes me feel slow. So I think this week I'm going to be exploring the textures, timbres, and production of the 5 tracks we're going to listen to and see if I can't get a better understanding of what this genre is. To kick it off, we have some Cult of Luna ahead of us with the track Into the Beyond. That's the one. We're not doing Disney musical today, which I think is going to be very clear when we actually turn the song on, because I know what kind of music Cult of Luna likes to make. So, with all that said, let's dive into it and see what Cult of Luna is bringing to the table today. Well, see, now that is unexpected. I like the loose drumstick feel. Really great consistency on those snare rolls. The bass has a nice timbre, really presents some mood. There's a nice roundness to it. I like how there is some tension in here, primarily from the timbres, not harmonically. This high guitar is just shrill, it's sharp. But there's a chill laid backness to it all. Oh, that's not chill. That's definitely not chill. This is what I was expecting, though. That volume is just rock solid up there. Yeah, I love that. It's a pretty sharp transition between the two, but there was still that gradual fade out, and we're still sort of fading into this section. Yeah, an interesting combination there. It was a smooth, rough transition. Or I should say a smooth, sharp transition. And I think it works. Fantastic way to get to this, or back to this. We have another crescendo. The compression coming in. Even that is a rather sharp transition between the mellow to this, but just having that compression fade in it goes a long way in making it feel smoother. I love how the guitars were just walking it down, holding out this note, and the bass was moving in the background. So they have a triplet feel in here that they sometimes lean heavily into. You see if I can find that again, I'll point it out. But they like to do a couple bars of the triplet and then move to straight quarter notes to really emphasize a 4 and then move back to a 3. Gonna sneak in some of that distortion. Oh, it's every 4, not every 2. It's not every 4 either, is it? That was a literal one-off idea, which is unusual. Cult of Luna does a lot of patterns in this track. A one-off idea is certainly an exception to how they build things. There we go. So big. There's so much clipping on the low ends. The sound cannot be contained. I do appreciate the rising intensity across this track. So it's the second time they faked us out with the compression fade in. There we go, wall of sounds. One, two, one, two, one, two, three, one, two, three, one, two, three, one, two, three, one, two, one, two, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Cult of Luna. They're a band. They're a heavy band. All right. Yeah, so I mean, it's impossible to talk about this song and not talk about this one key element of it: contrast. Not just any old contrast, though. This group really likes to showcase two highly polarizing ideas back to back. It's about creating a specific vibe and exploring something very different and returning back to that original vibe. We see this in so many different ways. The clear, obvious one is the quiet ambient versus the wall of sound post rock. But we also see this in the structure of the song, basically moving between these two styles, but always increasing so that we can actually look at, well, it increases in intensity. So we can actually look at this as building blocks that continue to move up in volume, in intensity, in largeness, in weight. Every section is, for the most part, heavier than the last, but when we look at the quiet ambient sections, we tend to see a singularity of them. What we get in our first ambient section, our intro, isn't too dissimilar than what we get in one of our middle ones. The middle ones are slightly more dense with more layers to them and more sounds, but for the most part, it's not just a contrast between these two ideas, it's a contrast between the bottom and how heavy we can take that, always pushing the envelope higher and higher. The first heavy section is tame compared to one of the last ones. So we have contrast across the entire song in that perspective as well, with the gulf between the two sides getting larger every time. We also have the contrast between the weight of the 4/4 and the speed of the triplet style over 4/4. Now you'll notice when I was counting it there at the end with the drum part, it was 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2. That's 16 beats. That means that we're still in 4/4, and since we couldn't run the whole thing in 3, we had to break up the final bit into a 4, or as I felt it, two groups of 2. That means we're running triplets for most of it, but not all of it. And we're doing it in a way that actually isn't triplets. See, I sometimes use the word triplet interchangeably between a actual musical triplet, which is putting 3 notes into a single beat. And I sometimes just use it about talking about groups of 3. That definition is not musically correct. It is a shorthand I tend to fall on because it's quicker to say that, but it is not technically correct, but I think it gets my point across most of the time. This is not done in triplets, it's done in groups of 3, with the groupings at the end being 2. If they were triplets, we could do the 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3, because you're putting all 3 of them into a single beat. There's 4 beats per bar, you're going to get 12 hits out of it. But they're doing it in eighth notes. So for an 8-beat measure, if you're playing eighth notes, which are half of a beat in this time signature, you're going to get 16 of them. And 16 isn't divisible by 3. That's where the problem lies, and that's why the ending of the phrase is what it is. But for the most part, we still have these groups of 3 presented in the eighth notes, getting 2 hits per beat, versus when we move to the quarter notes and we get 1 note per beat. So we have ba 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 ba. And so you have this rush, this intensity that comes in when they push towards those eighth notes, but they contrast it even more by focusing on groups of 3 rather than groups of 4, which are what would fit with the time signature. And so we have contrast on that rhythmic scale as well, but also the feeling of it. It almost feels like double time because we're playing twice as many notes in the same amount of time. So we have that contrast all over the place. Lesser towards the end when I really started to look for examples to showcase, but it happened a ton in the middle of the track, just constantly back and forth between just the slower stomping quarter notes and the speed of those eighth notes. So yeah, contrast is just heavily built into this track. What I really like though is that Cult of Luna to me is, they get brought up every time we talk about sludge. I think this is not the first time we've done Sludge Week, and I'm pretty sure we did Cult of Luna last time we explored this genre as well. But to me, they're a post-metal band. Granted, this song itself doesn't feel post-metal-y in whole, but several sections are certainly post-metal-esque. And post-metal deals with layers. And that's what every moment of this track deals with. It's really interesting to see the variety of ways. Well, there's only 2 ways they approach it, but it's still more than one. The variety of ways that they approach writing layered music. In the more ambient, slower sections, we explore this through the lens of spatiality. Technically, the heavier ones deal with space as well. We'll get to that in a second. It's about ensuring that every instrument has a place, that there's room between them, everything can be heard precisely. You have a foundation, you have a lead line, you have stuff out to the sides, you have a center channel concept. There's room with the pitches. They make sure that the bass has the lower end, guitars have the higher end, there's some mid-range guitars. There's space for everything to exist and room between them all. They're not smushed together. Nobody is ever stepping on anybody else's toes as far as instrumentation and performance go in the quieter sections, no matter how dense they get. And they do. We start off the track with just drum and bass. We add a guitar, we add a second guitar. Eventually, later on in the track, we'll have sections with multiple guitar lines. We'll have fuzzy guitars, compressed guitars coming in on the side with a little bit of distortion, while we have, a higher pitched guitar doing a little bit of a melody-esque line, and then we'll have like chordal guitar sitting in the middle, the bass will be on the bottom, the drums will sort of be everywhere. There's a spatiality to it all. No matter how many instruments we end up having in these sections, they're all perfectly spaced out and feel like everyone has room, personal space. No one's crowding in on anybody else. The opposite of this is still it's still an exercise on constructing layers in space, but there's just no regard for who's where, and it sort of sounds like everyone is everywhere. In the heavier sections, it is just a wall of sound. I mean, I pointed it out on the volume dude over there in the corner, and like even in songs that are consistently loud, the meter still kind of bounces a little bit near the top level. Not every single note is at maximum volume. Not every single second or beat is at maximum volume in a typical song. The bars that represent how loud the track is have movement to them. And you get this, and it is just capped out. The bars are not moving at all. I have a more detailed representation on my side, and while the midpoint, I got to figure out what I have is a bar with left and right stereo, um, left and right channel. But then I also have a little black square, and I think it tells me the floor, maybe the midpoint of where the volume's at. I don't know. I got to look into what that means. But even that was completely static, and I see that very, very rarely, even if the volume is maxed out. There's still some sort of movement, as there's some other element in the track that that isn't as consistent. It is just a perfect, full volume, immovable, equal height. That's not a word, we're going to stick with it. Just block of sound being thrust into your ears, and it's mind-boggling. It's difficult to really suss out what instrument is doing what. The drums have their own timbre, the growls have their own timbre, but all the guitars, even the bass, all sort of blend together, especially on the lower end notes, as the guitars and bass are all kind of pushing down to the lowest notes they can play. It all sort of just molds together into the plucked string sound, and it's just this meaty weight. I think even at a point it becomes difficult to hear the picking of the strings at all, and it's just the sound it produces, all of the distortion, the compression, the overdrive that is put on this. It just overshadows the instrument itself and becomes this entity of sound. It doesn't come from an instrument, it just is. And there's no consideration for separation of the instrumentation. It is just, this is the song. You cannot pick apart the pieces and see the trees. You are accepting that it is just a forest at this point, and there's nothing you can do to view it any other way. It is the exact opposite of the spatiality we get with the ambient sections, and there's so much contrast on this track in so many different ways that it almost feels like it shouldn't exist simultaneously. At a certain point, you have to reach a level of understanding that this is just two different songs. But I think they do a fantastic job at bridging that gap, making it seem fluid, and a lot of that comes down to their transitions. It is metal, and we've actually had some really great discussions about the use of harsh transitions in metal, specifically with death metal, as we explored that genre last week, and we had a lot of bands doing those types of transitions. It's sort of baked into the genre at this point. But it is a very metal thing to do, to change from two wildly different ideas immediately with no smoothness of transition, no introduction of the next ideas or anything like that. Just, we were doing this, now we're doing this, deal with it. It is just a very metal thing, and Cult of Luna does it here as well. What I really like, though, is that they do create a type of transition to it. It is technically a fade in and fade out. More traditionally, we would call it a crescendo to get louder and a decrescendo to get quieter. But it's particularly interesting that it's not an instrument. It might be, actually, now that I think about it, just, You strum your guitar, but you don't turn the volume up or you fade in that strum, so you don't get the initial hitting of the strings, you just get the sound itself. And to me, all I really hear in those moments is the compression, the crackle, the static. There is a tone to it, a pitch, but it's not really the core element of it. It almost feels like white noise, like TV static just coming in and starting from a corner of the song and just like a plague spreading throughout it until the song becomes just that crackling, just that distortion and compression. It's really great. Even coming off of our first heavy section, coming back into one of the more ambient ones, I even noted how it was pretty much this was heavy, now we're playing the light stuff, but because they allowed this compression to naturally fade, it feels like we were doing a decrescendo into this section. Even though if you look at every other instrument, there's a very abrupt stop when we did the heavy metal stuff to when we were coming into the lighter ambient stuff. And it's little ideas like this that allow the song to feel a bit more cohesive on top of what I think is really important is atmosphere. I've been trying to figure out what this is doing. I fully understand that the sections work together emotionally. I'm not quite sure why. I'm not sure what emotions I'm being told. I'm not sure what the story is through it, but as wildly different as the two sections sound, there is something intrinsic to both of them that I do think is the harmonic element, the chords they use that tie it all together, make it feel connected on some level. The heavy sections to me are just pure weight. I don't really get a sense of chords. I can hear the chords, I can hear the progression, but it just feels fairly standard. It's about setting a home, creating some tension, moving away from that, directing back towards the home, and then landing back in the home. It's pretty standard chord progression building. And through that, being that we start in a pretty heavy, dark place, it feels like music that is dark and heavy. But there are a couple of unique sections in here. The one I pointed out early on was when we hit our second heavy section and we just have this really low, crunchy guitar pitch come in. And then we took it down a half step and looked at something really dark and tense and imbalanced. And I had talked about this, was it during the Crimson reaction? That distortion amplifies everything. Overdrive amplifies everything. And one of the reasons that the power chord became so popular with distorted guitars is because it is the most stable series of notes. It's the root and the octave, which is the same note, and the root and the fifth, which is the most stable interval. It is so balanced and stable that even when distorted, it still shines through as just this really good, true chord series of notes. Now, if you introduce any instability to that, you start playing with spicier chords, jazzier ideas, introducing dissonance to it, that dissonance gets amplified. Something you might be able to get away with on an acoustic instrument is just going to sound like nails on a chalkboard with a guitar. Many metal bands have used this to great effect to create some of the noisiest sounds out there. Hardcore is really big on using some of this too. It's something that to me is terrible. I hate hearing no sounds usually, but people have really leaned into it, and there's people who enjoy the sound. So whatever, as usual, tools in a toolbox. You got to know what you're doing. You got to find an audience, but everything works if you want to put your mind to it. So anyways, we reach one of those points. It is just pure tension. The dissonance amplifies it. It is a gritty, dark, tense tone, and we just keep walking these half steps down before coming back up and doing it again. This is a moment of dread. This is one of the most palpable sections of the song for me. I do not like it. It is like the world is crushing in around me. I'm not a claustrophobic person. I mean, I'm sure if you put me in a small enough area, I'm not going to be cool with it, but for the most part, I'm fine with smaller spaces, but this feels like the walls are closing in on me. It does not make me feel good at all. It's just it just feels like this. And I find it really interesting that most of the song feels like this, a weight pushing down on me, crushing me with no way of getting any sort of leeway back. Everything is futile. At best, I'm holding it at bay, but I'm not making any progress at being able to stand any higher. And then this, it doesn't feel like a weight down on me. It feels like a weight around me, 360 degrees, compressing me down into a sphere. The interesting thing about a lot of music, metal weight, to me is that it's a feeling of being compressed downward. I have a feeling that with a lot of this stuff, if I could just get away from it, it wouldn't be a weight upon me anymore. And I kind of, in a sense, view it in a sort of two-dimensional way. It's pushing down, right? So obviously I can't escape on the y-axis, but I could maybe escape on the x-axis. Maybe if I walk that way or that way. Maybe on a z-axis. Maybe I can just walk forward enough to get out from under it. It feels like it has a place. That place is not everywhere. That section, though, where Cult of Luna makes it feel like the walls are caving in, is a weight I can't escape. It is ever present, coming in from every direction. I find it very interesting that they play it only twice in here. It makes it stand out from the other type of vertical weights that they have in this track. But I find it interesting that the second time around is a bit more soothing. It's still weighty. Trust me, it's tense, it's dense, it's massive, but it's paired with a moving bass line both times through that I find really nice to listen to. But the second time through, we have a guitar melody. It's not exceptionally moving. It holds a note for 3 beats, and on beat 4, it plays a passing tone that takes us to the next note that it's going to hold out for 3 beats, and then a passing tone that returns us back to that first one. It's a simple, effective, utilized in many songs type of melodically foundational idea, but it feels comforting there. I found that to be very confusing. This was around the middle of the song, and I kind of figured at this point I knew what they were accomplishing. They do change things up a little bit towards the end of the track. I was waiting for a bridge to really do something drastically different. We never really get that. It's a constant back and forth between their two modes as they subtly change things up in each mode as we progress through the track. And like I was saying, at this point I was trying to figure out what the song was. And I think I figured it out. We'll hit the lyrics in a second, but just tying my feelings through this track with the title into the beyond, it's, at least to me, about the comforts and the discomforts of being where you're not supposed to be. Breaking outside, going beyond the limits. Maybe there is a metaphorical perspective on this. Surpassing one's limits is a fairly common phrase when speaking about physical sports, about breaking old world records in, track or something, throwing the furthest football pass before, it got caught and touchdowned or whatever. There's ways to push the limits of what humans are capable of. Maybe it goes in that direction too, but I perceive it as more of a physical breaking of limitations, of going beyond to another plane of existence. Imagine, if you will, somehow we found a way to get into a fourth dimensional plane. What would that entail? What kind of horrors, cosmic horrors, would we see? What does it feel like to recognize a fourth dimension of your being? It's really tough to understand. So, one thought exercise I typically use with this, I've been doing this for a long time, and I don't know why I'm stuck on this, but like I've always been really interested in this topic. Imagine you draw a line. Two-dimensional object. It does not have depth to it. It has horizontal spatiality and vertical spatiality. And you give it sentience. It understands it's a line, its world is flat. And then you introduce it to a world of 3 dimensions, of depth. I imagine it loses its mind, much in the same way that humans lose their mind looking at cosmic gods in Lovecraftian novels. It's just not something that a being of his status can comprehend, and the sheer knowledge of it, of being pushed into that state, is beyond comprehension. And I kind of feel like that's what happens here. It's about being pushed into this next realm of going beyond not just where we could be, but where we are supposed to be. There are comforts in that. I'm sure there's a soothing knowledge. There's maybe even a level of distance. The 3 dimensional world you know and the problems you thought you had are so minuscule in this larger perspective, with this increased depth in whatever axis this fourth dimension might be. There is calm to that, I suppose. Wonder, maybe, even, that we might hear in some of the more ambient sections. But there's a crushing weight. The mind is not meant to feel that, to understand that, to comprehend it. That's what the heavier sections feel like. And this is a battle, at least to me, to be present and understand something that the mind was never meant to. The temporary solace you feel amidst the moments of crushing weight, despair, and madness. Let's hit some lyrics, see what they decide to sing about against the backdrop of this music. Uh, I'm sure those of you who knew the lyrics were probably having a good laugh as I explained my take on the musical storytelling. The song is about feeling comfortable with somebody enough to show them your true self, to bring your defenses down. It says, "Let me take you down underneath this false surface. Tonight is the night when you travel into the heart of the unknown. Night reveals what is hidden in the shadows." I like that line because the night absolutely does not highlight what's in the shadows. It's even harder to see what's in the shadows at night. It's why ninjas don't strike during the day. But like I get the metaphor behind it, right? Those that lurk in the shadows come out during the night. But it's one of those interesting lines I like that on the surface it's like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. And you're like, oh, but actually it's got a real cool poetic angle to it. So anyways, yeah, night reveals what is hidden in the shadows. What you see is just a shell of me. To escape the suffering, we keep our emotions at a distance, so far away that our skin becomes our fortress. Leave from me and we'll see what lies ahead. Let's gather in twilight in those blue reflections. So I don't know which side's supposed to reflect which. The calm of the ambient would probably be. See, it really depends on the perspective, right? And I think that's an interesting angle. It could be that both sides are representative of both sides. The calmness could be the exterior that people show, the mask that they put on when they don't want to show people their flaws, when they don't want to expose themselves and make them vulnerable, while the darkness is what they hold underneath. But on the flip side, the calmness could also be how somebody feels inside, and the weight is the pressure that they put on themselves in order to conform. That's when they wear the mask and be someone they're not in order to fit in better. I'm kind of curious what Cult of Luna's take is on this. If they have a specific angle or if that duality is baked into the song. Now, what's interesting is this final stanza says, we're coming out as one. That is when we realize, that is when we arrive. This is when we fall down. Now, falling down typically has a negative connotation. It's about failure, it's descent, it's backwards progress. Falling down has a lot of metaphorical angles on it, none usually good. The song says, I am more than I present myself to be. In fact, who I present is just a shell of me. So come with me into my depths. I'd like to be vulnerable with you. And when we leave this, that's when we fall down. I don't know. To me, that's a really interesting angle to go on it. I'm curious again what their authorial intent is, but if nothing else, let me know what your read is of this as a listener, as a fan, as a whatever, someone who didn't write the music. Um, this is one of those songs where I kind of wish I hadn't have read the lyrics. Maybe somebody will introduce me to a concept. I'm like, oh, actually, this is fantastic. But I really liked my interpretation of just the music. And I don't know, the music doesn't feel as mm, anymore with this extra context. It sort of diminishes the musical side for me, knowing that these are the lyrics on it. Maybe I just gotta forget. I'm pretty good at forgetting stuff. We'll have listened to something like just a week ago, and I'm like, yeah, we checked out something last week that reminded me of this, and I don't remember what that was. So maybe there's a chance I do forget what the song's about, and I just return to enjoying the musicality of it. Again, that doesn't mean the lyrics are bad. I could be missing something that really makes everything click for me. But I thought I had a really cool interpretation of it, and they didn't touch on really any of what I was feeling from the music. Those are my thoughts. Cult of Luna's Into the Beyond. Almost said Into the Unknown again. Let me know what your thoughts are. Oh man, I remember back to the beginning of this. I'm like, we're not listening to Disney music. And then it's like the calmest Cult of Luna song I think I've ever heard. I'm like, actually, maybe. And then they tricked me. comments, thoughts, perspectives, opinions, you want to add on to what I said, correct me on stuff, any of that, let me know down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you to this menu right here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Alright, that wraps it up for this one. We do have a special selection coming up next. I don't know what it is, but I remember being kind of stoked for it. Oh, it's the Mars Volta, but it's a different album. I don't think we've listened to anything from this album before, and people always tell me that they're a rather diverse band. I've just been given a very small slice of what they make. So I'm intrigued about that. I'm ready to check it out. You can catch that at 5:30 Eastern Standard today, which if you're watching this live, it's already out. If you're watching it not live, also, that Mars Volta is already out. uh, Otherwise, y'all know how it works. I'll be back here tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC as usual. We're going to continue on with this week exploring sludge metal. Get stoked for that. I'm sure there's going to be some great stuff. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.